Jennifer, and thank you for joining me and listening to the Still Small Voice. So, last episode, I talked about the two different ways to take action, the things to think about, and why I usually meld both tactics together. So, now we're at the point where we've taken action. And now what? What does that really look like? There are usually lots of things that are happening at this point, good, bad, indifferent, annoying, joyous, wonderful, amazing, frustrating things. And I want to talk today about the three things that will likely happen along the way, what they could mean, and how you can deal with them. Now, the first thing, after you've taken some action, you want to go back to the way things were. I've spent many time convincing myself that I want to go back, that I should go back, that I should not have made that decision, that I should be doing all the things I used to do that I don't do anymore. Even if I really don't want to, I'm still telling myself that's the case. So there are two ways to deal with this. Usually at one point there's a point of no return where you're following your still small voice and you aren't going back even if you really wanted to. So when your brain panics, you can tell it a combination of things. You can remind it we wanted to do this, we felt strongly enough to do whatever we had to do to get here to do this. This is why we wanted to do this. Or if your brain is lazy like mine is, I also remind it that going back to where we came from might take more effort and work than staying the course. That usually gets my brain to shush. Now, if you're in the early stages of change, before you've passed what I call a point of no return, that might work against you. So this is why, and when people talk about so much about the why of why you do something. Why do you want to do anything? What do you think it's going to get you to? And they say, and by they I mean a whole ton of people out there, if you type in, why, Simon Sinek, all those people, you'll get more information than you ever wanted or imagined. But they say that if your why is not compelling enough to calm yourself down and stay the course, maybe it's not strong enough. That is what they say. But this is what I say. I say, we are human beings having human experiences. So, of course, a why, a perfectly written, ironclad, totally insubmergible why, isn't going to be good enough sometimes. It is never going to pass muster every single time you need it. It will be good enough most of the time to keep you from freaking out. It will not be good enough all the time to keep you from freaking out. Because if you had a good enough why, well, you probably aren't even listening to the podcasts. And I'd argue that you've got a few other things supporting you that probably make it easier. So what happens when you don't stick with something and you do go back? This happens. Sometimes your why isn't strong enough and you do turn around and you go back. I think that that's part of the process. It's not a step back. It's actually a step forward. It's something was tried. That's not going to work right now. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. You know best, and only you know if you decided to go back out of fear or panic or laziness. All of them are perfectly acceptable reasons, by the way. Because I'm not saying that any one of those reactions is wrong or invalid. I just know there are times it is easy to fool ourselves into doing something we don't want to do and vice versa. Like, we know if we're just afraid, and we also know if we're afraid for valid reasons that we need to take any choice or make anything that we would need to make. So the second thing that happens at this point, and it usually happens at the same time while you're telling yourself to go back or your brain's making you think and do crazy things, is that everything gets absolutely much, much worse than you could have imagined when you thought it was going to get better. So instead of having one of those days, you have one of those weeks or months or years or decades. I'm laughing about it now, but at the time when I've had these moments, that I know that the pain and the anguish and the anxiety and the stress are real. We cannot laugh about it in the moment. We can only laugh about it afterward. Now, I've been taught to say, this is what it looks like while it's all coming together, or, this is how it's supposed to be. And then my brain adds in the background, it looks like a fucking train wreck. So for me, it breaks the cycle in my brain. But it also, without my little addition, it can feel like I'm lying to myself. And I don't like feeling that way. I don't like lying to myself. it is so conditioned in us to lie to ourselves constantly that I do not want any other ability to be continue to lie to myself. It just doesn't work. Um, I will never, ever, 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 ever say affirmations or say things that have people lie to themselves. I just will not do it. But with the caveat, if it amuses you or it breaks up the cycle, like, go right ahead, like, have at it. Yes, things usually do have to fall apart to come back together. I'm not disagreeing, and there are stories upon stories upon stories of how, a change in one part of life leads to a change in other parts of life. These are normally told with the whole, like, I got my health back on track, and then my marriage got better, and then I got a raise, and then, all of a sudden we're all hanging out every night down by the fire pit singing Kumbaya and just thrilled with each other. Okay. Yes, maybe, but let's remember what comes up also comes down. So, for the same vein, if you're finding something really hard and difficult, you might see it in other places, and that's fine. Nothing has gone wrong, it's all gone right, but let's not kid ourselves. It might all just completely suck for a while. And this is the key part. You have to make sure you aren't piling more on top of yourself along the way. I have to tell this to myself because we really do have to be discerning every step of the way. So I'm going to state something obvious that no one ever mentions for some reason right now. Do not try to rainbow butterfly unicorn over absolute shit. There are no amount of positive thoughts or justifications about, like the no pain, no gain crap that people justify some absolutely absurd, unhealthy, dangerous, abusive situations that we put ourselves through. I get it. Crappy stuff does happen so we can push through and come out the other side. We can tell that inspirational story I talked about, join the getting through it mastermind for $2,000 payment plan for 12 months over whatever. But sometimes with things getting way worse, pushing through so you can have that inspirational story, that is not the solution. It does mean that there is stuff that has to be dealt with head on in full understanding and awareness of the actual situation. And I think there's a lot of downplaying of true realities, true situations of abuse, of harm, of retaliation, of just fearing for physical safety that I think our society kind of wallpapers over and hopes that the wallpaper looks good. And to be fair, we've been trained that way. We've been trained to paper over the bad stuff and or spin it to make it a positive thing, right? So what I want to say is, don't ever tell yourself you just have to deal with this stuff. This is the next level. I'm going to phrase this from when I was church going days, devil's making me crazy so then I can overcome and I can praise the Lord and I can redeem what God, devil meant for bad, God meant for good. Ugh. Lots of times that's some patronizing nonsense. People just don't want to see the reality of life, the reality of the things that happen to us all day, every day, that we have to manage mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So, caveat done on this one. I just want to make sure that we can have a great story about overcoming and pushing through fear and doing it anyway. But we also need to be very, very honest with ourselves and with those around us, even if they don't want to hear it, about the realities of certain situations. Pushing through is not necessarily the solution. I would argue it rarely actually is the solution. Looking back, I probably put myself through a lot more abuse than I should have, thinking I had to do it the hard way. So anyway, next, moving on to the third thing. With all of this going on, so you got it getting worse before it gets better. You got your brain panicking, saying you got to go back. You got to go back. So we're back to needing that support that we talked about in previous episodes. We got to let the people be the people, as someone very wise has shared with me. And we've got to figure out what we can use and what support looks like for each of us and how it best fits for what we need at any given time. Again, what worked and looked good before might be completely different after taking an action, making a choice, and as every moment as you're continuing on. I think we forget that too. Just because it worked 5 minutes ago doesn't mean it's going to work now. Just because it worked 20 years ago doesn't mean it's going to work now. Just because it worked 3 seconds ago doesn't mean it's going to, work now. So I got to say, and I've learned a lot in dealing with a certain situation. My previous marriage and subsequent separation, divorce are the lens that I see life through now. This has kind of influenced everything I do, everything I think about, everything I say, the relationships I have, the people I hang out with, how I want to spend my time and how I want to spend my money. And it's coming up pretty frequently in the last couple weeks because I'm headed toward my 10-year anniversary of it all essentially going to shit. And there are days where it feels like it is lifetimes ago. It feels like a life that I never lived. And then there are nights, as of this past week even, where I still wake up in a panic that I'm still in it. And my heart is racing and I cannot get back to sleep. And I truly feel in fear for my life. So I say this because it was very hard for me to leave. And it was probably, though, even harder for me to stay leaving my ex-husband. I had many people, including myself, who gave me lots of stories about why I should go back, why I should push through, why that this was going to be a redemption story for him and I, why I should keep staying the course, which is why it took me a couple of attempts on this before I finally left. And even when I left, I was ready to take him back without any apologies or repercussions. I was completely and totally delusional because I had been fed the stories of this is what you do, this is what you keep doing, this is how we break the cycle, this is whatever. But yet, for the 2 years after we separated until the divorce was final, and even a little bit after the divorce was final, I got to admit, I was still kind of like, let's go back to the old way. Let's go back to the old way. I should just sacrifice and I should just give up. And to be honest, if the situation hadn't gotten as bad as it did toward the end of the first 2 years of the fighting, and the separation divorce, I might still be in that relationship. I might still be there today and I wouldn't be talking about this at all. I'd have a very, very different story than the one I'm talking about right now. But within those 2 years of separation toward divorce, looking at the right circumstances, I had different circumstances. I was able to remove myself through many acts of loving kindness from family and friends. I had to do things differently. I was working 2 or 3 jobs already trying to pay off his debt because he wasn't going to do it. And I realized as I was doing that I just wanted the freedom of what was coming ahead, even if it took the pain and the manipulation and the couple years of multiple jobs to get to it, to get that debt paid off and moved on. So yeah, I felt way worse for a while, probably a good couple year while. And now I can look back, and as I mentioned, I can laugh about how messed up everything was. It was a complete shit show. And like I said, I can laugh now. I could not laugh in the middle of it. I was 33 years old, and I felt like I was a 10-year-old kid in the grocery store trying to figure out what to buy and feed myself. Like, I felt like I was completely inept at life. I didn't see where any relief was coming from. But what I did find during this time is having a random conversation with strangers, like at the library, at the store, like totally gave me a liberation that I had never felt before. Yet at the same time, these were people and maybe they were going to hurt me. I was still fearful and scared at the same time. And in my brain, I knew how messed up all of this was, how my brain didn't know what to do. It was just complete and total panic. And I didn't know which way to go and which way was up. And as I went through it, that's when I realized that no one else could speak to this situation for me. No one else really had the answer for me. I'd heard their advice, none of which was relevant, and all of it, I realized, a total projection of their fears. Because when you talk to people about something that really scares them, you watch very quickly how their brain just skips to their fear and has no relation to anything you were saying. And in some ways, it was more awful to realize that with all of this panic, with all of this anxiety, with all of this information being given to me by wonderful, loving people who cared about me but was totally irrelevant, I was more on my own than I could have ever realized after feeling abandoned by my ex, after feeling abandoned by the systems, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. But having those random conversations with people in the library, reaching out for new things, new places, new people, new inputs, new books. My default is books. Um, and as I did that, these things that weren't necessarily traditional support gave me the support that I needed. Maybe not in the expected ways, more in the unexpected ways, to be quite honest. Maybe it was just going to a new restaurant or going out to eat at all at that time, if I could even find the $10 to do that. Or, we now have the internet, researching a concept or an idea or an interest, or fantasizing and looking up places I would want to go and restaurants I would want to go to and things I would want to try and places I would want to see. That gave me enough in my brain to stop it, to keep going, to think about what was possible, and to keep trying little by little. So as it kept going, about over 3-4 years, I found places I felt safe, I met new people, and I started getting more support, as we think about it, from people who love me, from friends, from family. And that was something I had never had before in my life, to be quite honest. So, but at this time, there were some things I had to look square in the eye and acknowledge that I really didn't have the time, energy, or patience to do, right? He left me with a ton of debt. And I had to accept the fact that I would have to do the work to pay it off, that I could not go after him via a lawyer and get the money, because at that point, we both just knew it wasn't, you cannot get blood from a stone, right? I had to look squarely at the legacy of my parents and the pain I carried from childhood that had gotten me into that relationship and into this position. I had to understand that. I had to look it square in the eye. I had to, at the same time, understand that some people who claim to be supportive are actually super, super toxic. And I had to figure out how to remove them from my life, either minimize them or remove them. And when you're already trying to find support, it's much harder to pull out what little support you have left, even if it is toxic and painful and hurtful to you. So I'm say all of this. I give you this story just for you to understand all the things while you are making the choice for whatever it is as you're listening to your still small voice. It is funny. It is funny. It's not really funny, but it is funny. Here's my story about that whole, I got through the pain but there were a lot of things along the way that, had I been more honest with myself, had I not bought that no pain, no gain, I could have made it much more, not even pleasant, I could have made it much more tolerable on myself during that time, trying to get out of this situation for myself. So, as I've said before, making the choice to stay strong and stay focused for yourself, it's your choice. You get to decide every single time, every single moment. And that any, what we consider wavering or steps back, are just part of that ultimate choice, that part of acknowledging yourself as a human being, trying to figure this thing out, just like everybody else around you is, though they won't admit it. So, it is about the hard stuff, doing the hard stuff that knocks us on our ass, that tells us who we are because of what we decide to say about it, what we decide to tell the story about. We want to have that redemption story. And again, I want you to have a redemption story too. I want us all to have redemption stories all the time. But we have to make sure we know what is real. And we have to be honest about what is real. And we have to make sure that we don't let any motivational, positive, think gobbledygook get in the way. All of these society's messages of no pain, no gain, just suck it up, buttercup. We just have to make sure about that. Because when you are listening, it's going to happen. All of those things are going to happen. And they're going to happen over and over in different places, in different ways. So taking action, wish it was a one-step thing. Unfortunately, it's not. Like most things in life, you do it once, you got to do it again. It's almost kind of like housework. Like, eventually the house is going to get dirty again. You're going to have to wash the clothes again. You're going to have to make the same decisions day after day, moment after moment. It is the same thing listening to the still small voice. So I want to thank you for joining me this episode, and I'll be back. There's only 2 more episodes left for this season. I cannot believe we're already so quickly coming to the end of the season and the end of the year. This is coming out right before American Thanksgiving, so to any listeners who celebrate, happy Thanksgiving. I will be having a quiet meal with my mother and father and spending the day probably offline as much as possible. So I'm hoping you get a break this holiday season as well. I'll see you next episode. If you want more, please subscribe and head over to my website, listeningtothestillsmallvoice.com, where I'm publishing blog posts every other week that supplement this season's theme and episodes. Sign up for the email list to join our small but mighty group doing what we can to listen to the still small voice. See you next time.